I mentioned we might have to pivot, so let's go ahead and audible here. Josh Stein, North Carolina Attorney General, joining us on the Heister Automotive Group hotline. We look forward to hearing from him. Josh, thank you very much for taking the time. I'm sure you've been fielding conversations about the Tez Walker eligibility news from earlier today, and we want to dive right in with that. So,
sure.
You wrote a letter to the NCAA regarding their decision to make Tez Walker ineligible to play this college football season. That was back in September. I have that letter in front of me. I want to ask about one of the very first sentences. I'll read it to you. You wrote it, but just so everybody else is on the same page. I write to express my concern about the NCAA's decision to bar Devon Tez Walker from playing football for the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill this season. That decision is wrong and likely illegal. Can you summarize for us what you felt about that ruling may have been illegal?
Yeah. Well, first I'll explain how it was wrong, which actually ties into its illegality.
All right.
Basically, you have a young man, Tez Walker, who only ever played football at one other school, Kent State. He had issues with his grandmother's health, mental health issues. He wanted to be closer to home and transferred to North Carolina. After he transferred to North Carolina, the NCAA changed its rules, saying you can't do this where you transfer twice between schools and you have to sit out, but there are exceptions. And so, one, it was unfair that they applied a rule to a young man after he'd already made his decision. Two, they didn't apply their own rule with its exceptions fairly to him. And three, this issue about the legality is we have state and federal laws that prohibit entities like the NCAA from engaging in restraints of trade, unlawful restraints of trade that are anti-competitive. I've taken a lot of fast food restaurants to court and gotten settlements because they have what they called no-poach agreements, telling a fast food worker that if you worked at one store, you couldn't go to a competitor across the street that would pay you more money. That's unlawful because it doesn't help the worker. It restrains the worker's ability to do what the worker wants to do with his or her life. Tez Walker wants to play football, and he has a right to play football. And if the NCAA is going to keep him from doing that, they have to have a damn good reason. And they just don't have one in this case.
We're talking with Josh Stein, North Carolina Attorney General. Josh, to hone in on that point, does that mean the law or the legality in your perspective is looking at Tez Walker as a worker rather than so many other cases we've dealt with him as student athletes as students, right? When you make the comparison to a fast food worker, it sounds like an employee rule being applied to a student athlete, which has always been kind of a gray area.
Yeah, well, the student athletes, the Supreme Court has been very clear, retain the right to share in whatever value they create. And that's why we have name, image, likeness. And so if the NCAA wants to come up with some rule that limits a young person's ability to do what they want to do, there has to be a reason. And, one possible good reason would be the need for a person to take some time to reacclimate to a new school socially and academically. But that really falls apart in the case of someone like Tez Walker, who came in with a 3.7 GPA from Kent State and remains in excellent academic standing at UNC. So if you're going to have a rule, you have to tailor it narrowly to the purpose why you have the rule. Just keeping a kid from being able to play football is not a valid reason to deny someone the right to play sports.
Your letter was dated September 26th, and at the end of the letter, you stated that you were ready to engage with the NCAA on a voluntary basis. Did you have any contact with the NCAA between the time of sending this letter and when Tez Walker was ruled eligible? Yeah,
they wrote us a letter, and we had a follow-up conversation.
All right. And anything you can pass along to us on what may have been changing with the NCAA on what, allowed Tez Walker's ruling now to be different than it was a month ago?
Yeah, one problem is the NCAA is a bit of a black box and that they don't really tell you necessarily what's going on. I will say this, that Tez Walker and his lawyers did an excellent job advocating for Tez. The university had outside counsel, and we had very constructive discussions with them, the Board of Trustees. were actively engaged. My office was engaged. We were all working collaboratively just because it wasn't fair. It wasn't right. And I'm just happy for this young man. I mean, his dream is to play football in the ACC, play at Carolina, and now he gets to do that. There just wasn't a reason why he couldn't.
And I'm glad that, like, the common sense of it, our common sense and your common sense seem to be aligning. We're talking with Josh Stein, North Carolina Attorney General. He's joining us on the Heister Automotive Group hotline. Why get involved in this specific situation, right? There's if you listen to enough sports radio, like shows like this one, you get used to calling the NCAA out for things that you feel are not in the best interest of the student athlete. What was it about this one that compelled you to write the letter?
Well, I just assumed, I was surprised like everybody else before the South Carolina game that he was pulled from the lineup. Mm-hmm. But when UNC and Tez submitted their reconsideration petition, I just was certain that the NCAA was going to give it to him, because you just look at the facts and they are all in Tez's favor. And when they didn't do it, I was frankly pretty shocked. I know the general counsel over at UNC and called and said, I've got some lawyers who have some expertise in antitrust. And we just started talking, and then we got connected with Tez Walker's lawyers, and we all just weighed in because, look, this young man's a North Carolinian. He's entitled to his rights under the law, and we were happy to be able to play a little role.
Do you anticipate a call for you to get involved maybe for other schools when there's a situation of NCAA eligibility for a player?
If I do and the equities are in their favor and the NCAA is acting unjustly, we will definitely consider it.
Josh Stein, North Carolina Attorney General, connecting with us on the Heister Automotive Group hotline here on The Drive with Tim Donnelly. You add in the letter, I thought this was a very interesting portion, your letter back from September 26th to the NCAA, that the year in residence rule is now riddled with so many exceptions that the NCAA cannot plausibly substantiate the rule's prior justifications. So I kind of ask you this. Is this a rule the NCAA needs to do away with or rewrite from scratch in order for it to be enforceable against all of the things you brought up in legality sense at the beginning of this conversation?
I believe that the rule as written is very much subject to legal challenge, but there are ways in which the rule could be drafted that would be more likely to survive that kind of scrutiny. The NCAA may want to go back and take a look at it.
In your opinion, is there a fair way to limit players' ability to transfer multiple times, just like any other student in the student body would be able to, or coaches are often bouncing around? Is there a fair way to limit that, or are we? Go ahead.
One fair way to look at it, Tim, is if the purpose of the rule is, as some say, is to make sure that a young person who transfers schools multiple times, you might need to be concerned about their ability to reacclimate to a third school academically and socially. You just worry that they need to focus on getting readjusted before they get into the rigors of competitive sports. I mean, if that's your justification, then have your rule be tailored for those for whom that has meaning. And someone like Tez, who actually had excellent academic grades, both at Kent State and Chapel Hill, and is from North Carolina, and so it wasn't going to be a big shock for him to come back to his home state university, then it doesn't make sense. But there may be some other case in which it might make sense, but at least make the rule tailored so that it actually applies where it makes some sense.
Another part that I thought was interesting about this case and others that I've followed in college sports involving NCAA eligibility is kind of the line, like, at what point does the NCAA's need for proof that the qualifications for these exceptions are being met overstep the bounds of a player and their family's right to privacy, right? I know more about Tez Walker's grandma and his mental health than I feel I deserve to know about any college football player.
All of that is very fair points, very, very fair points. And I'm sure the NCAA knows more than you or I do. And I trust they'll be discreet and respect his privacy. But, I bet you that was part of it. Like, I don't know, maybe there were things that Tez didn't want to put out there initially. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. And last thing before I let you go, and thank you very much for taking the time to jump on the air with us.
Sure.
We keep hearing about, and I say we keep hearing about this broke earlier this afternoon, but this missing piece of information, which seems like there's a golden ticket that was not available to the NCAA, and once they got this golden ticket, it's like, oh, this changes everything. Is there, after looking at the NCAA rule, and you obviously, based on your letter, did a deep dive into all of the different qualifications and exceptions and all those sorts of things, is it plausible that there's like literally one piece of information that changes a massive months-long extravaganza like this one?
I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know the NCAA's motivation in refusing him the first time. I don't know their motivation, at least their true motivation as to why they've changed their mind again this time. What I do know is that Tez Walker and his team made a very compelling case to the NCAA, and I'm just incredibly gratified that this young guy gets to play football. I mean, he's just a kid who wants to play football, and if you're going to keep somebody from playing football, there should be a reason for it that can withstand some scrutiny. And there was no rational reason to keep this guy off the field. Let him play, let him have fun, and hopefully he'll be successful, and hopefully this will be his career. Let's wish him nothing but the best.
I think that's a perfect way to wrap up our conversation. Thank you very much for taking the time to jump on the show.
Tim, thanks. Take care.